Welcome back to the Laura Ingraham Show. I'm John Hinderocker from Powerline, filling in for Laura today. And we are joined now by historian Craig Shirley. Craig, thanks for being with us.
You bet, John. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you. Craig, I was absolutely stunned and outraged by something that I saw in the Washington Times reported by Jennifer Harper. and it is a movie that apparently is going to be in production. You know, I thought Truth, remember, Truth, the bomb that told the revisionist history about the George W. Bush National Guard documents and the 60-minute story and so on. Hollywood, they can't help themselves. This is a story. I thought that was about as bad as it could get, but this is 100 times worse. This is apparently a movie about Ronald Reagan that is going to be produced. Tell our listeners about this film.
Well, I don't know much more about it than what I read in the news reports, but basically, you can thank Bill O'Reilly for being the inspiration for this movie because they said so in print. It's a fictitious movie called Reagan, about Ronald Reagan, in which he suffers Alzheimer's in his second term, and apparently a White House intern, hint, tries to convince the president that he's actually acting his way through the presidency instead of actually being president. But I think, the key is the writers said they got the inspiration from Bill O'Reilly and his recent trashing and fictitious trashing of Ronald Reagan in his book, Killing Reagan. So it's just one more example of Hollywood trying to rewrite history, whether it's Charlie Wilson's War, which gave Reagan no credit for the fall of the Cold War, whether it's Truth, whether it's a recent movie, Trumbo. Hollywood is committed ultra leftists who, when they're not doing marvelous movies like Pixar, they're doing politically correct, politically charged, politically inaccurate, historically inaccurate movies that everybody needs to be on their guard against.
Craig Shirley, I want to just read the official short description of this project, which has been put out. Quote, "When Ronald Reagan falls into dementia at the start of his second term, an ambitious intern is tasked with convincing the commander-in-chief that he is an actor playing the president in a movie."
Right.
That is the official description they have put out.
Right.
And this movie apparently is going to be made. It's been included in something called the Blacklist. What's the Blacklist?
Apparently, I think it's apropos for Hollywood that the most prized scripts that go to the highest bidder are called the blacklist. There's something quite true and accurate, at least about that, if nothing else, about Hollywood. So apparently, this movie is bidding very high among various producers who want to produce it. What's interesting is that they've never done the blacklist about Lyndon Johnson or Jimmy Carter or John Kennedy or Franklin Roosevelt or any of the other revered icons of the left. They only do these movies about presidents of the right. Especially Reagan. There's an obsession in Hollywood with tearing down the Reagan legacy. The week of his funeral, here he was, the president of the Screen Actors Guild 5-6 times, and they barely acknowledged his passing, the Screen Actors Guild. And even to this day, there's no acknowledgement in the offices of the Screen Actors Guild. There's no photo of Ronald Reagan. There's nothing. And even though he was probably the most consequential president, I mean, he got residuals for old aging actors and actresses and, confronted the feared Hollywood moguls, and yet they refused to acknowledge his presidency.
Yeah, it's really ironic. He's the one president that had a real meaningful connection with Hollywood, and they spurn him. Now, Craig Shirley, I know you are one of several Reagan historians that pushed back against Bill O'Reilly's book, which was this sort of fictionalized account.
It was a cast of thousands who pushed back against O'Reilly's book.
Well, basically everybody who knew anything about Reagan's presidency.
Yes.
But I'm sure some of our listeners are aware of that book, have seen O'Reilly talk about it. No doubt some of them have actually read that book. Let's maybe just take a couple of minutes, if you would, Craig, and just kind of lay out the real facts and how it is that we know that this claim that Reagan was sinking into dementia, while he was president is completely bogus.
Absolutely, completely. I watched a tape last night, John, of Reagan doing an interview for Firing Line in 1992. Now, this is 4 years after he left the presidency. He's being interviewed by Bill Buckley. He's bright. He's engaging. He's funny. He's everything that refutes O'Reilly's false charges that Reagan was watching soap operas and out of it, and Nancy Reagan was running the White House. And here he is in his early 80s now, in 1992, doing this interview with Buckley, and he's utterly, completely, charming and with it, and demonstrably, mentally alert in every way imaginable. So O'Reilly's book, like his other books, is filled with falsehoods and false narratives and canards and prevarications. I heard the next title for his next book is going to be Killing Facts.
Well, I want to go back to what you said there for a moment, Craig Shirley, because he's totally lucid, totally alert, totally sharp. In 1992, 4 years after leaving the presidency, but also, how old would he have been in 1992? He's an elderly guy at that point, isn't he?
Well, let's see. He left the presidency in January of 1989. He was 77 years old, so I guess do the math. I guess he would be 81, 82 years old by 1992. So
yeah, so it's 4 years after the fact, and he's still totally sharp and totally with
what's
it.
interesting too is, John, is that there is on the University of Virginia website, Reagan went to. He loved going to college campuses, and he loved to talk to young people, and I think that explains why he was so popular with young Americans. Why he got such a astonishing percentage of their vote, even higher than he did from just average Americans.
Right.
I think when he left office, his approval rating among voters under 30 was something like 77, 79%. Among everybody else, is about 69, 70%. But if you go to the UVA website, they have a transcript. He went there in December of 1988. His presidency is waning away. He's only got a month or two left. And he went there just to do a forum with the college students. And if you look at the videotape and if you look at the transcript, he's funny, he's bright, he's engaged. He completely refutes O'Reilly's false charges about him being out of it. So it's unfortunate because a lot of historians have worked a long time to push back against the false storyline that Reagan was a grade B actor with premature orange hair. And Lou Cannon and myself and Kyron Skinner and and Paul Kengor and Steve Hayward and Kyron Skinner and other people have done a lot to prove that Reagan was intellectually stimulating and bright, engaged. He labored long hours negotiating with Gorbachev. He labored long hours negotiating with Dan Rostenkowski over the '86 tax deal. And now O'Reilly, because of his media platform, is able to trump a lot of us and push out this tissue of lies, basically. And now we've got to go out, pull out our shovels, and clean up the mess that O'Reilly has created, which is exactly what George Will said. That Bill O'Reilly has made a mess of history.
And one of the things going on here, of course, Craig Shirley, is for a long time the Democrats have wanted to bring down Ronald Reagan. He was the most successful president of the 20th century.
Yes.
I lived through his administration. You lived through his administration.
Right.
Here's a guy who inherited the disaster left behind by Jimmy Carter with 20% prime rate and the 11% unemployment.
America out of control, losing a Cold War, national morale is gone.
Right. And overseas, Russia, the Soviet Union is on the march, and the price of oil is skyrocketing. And people were saying America's finished, America's never going to be powerful again, and the next generation has to look forward to not being as well off as their parents were. And Ronald Reagan was an unbelievable success in both domestic policy, where he restored the economy, brought it back to a vigor that it hadn't seen for decades, and in foreign policy, where he restored American strength and laid the groundwork for ultimate victory in the Cold War. And how the Democrats can try to take that record of success, unexcelled, unequaled by any other 20th century president.
Well, Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, well, just to try to twist it around and say, well, Reagan was incompetent or, or whatever. I mean, it's so absurd.
Well, now they have a new ally in Bill O'Reilly, who is now giving them cover, a smokescreen to make their false allegations about Ronald Reagan. And if they have anybody doubt, they can point to Bill O'Reilly of a failure.
The other point I want to make here, Craig, before we let you go, it picks up on something you mentioned earlier, which is that a lot of people forget that Reagan's best demographic was young people. It was young people more than anyone who supported Reagan. And you mentioned that was in part because he liked to go to college campuses. He engaged with young people. But I think another huge factor is that Reagan came along at a time, as I mentioned a moment ago, when it was perceived that America was in decline. And liberals were literally telling young people at that time that they shouldn't expect the kind of prosperity that their parents had experienced, that America's best days are behind her, that America is in decline. And it's too bad for you folks just starting out in life, but you are inheriting a declining nation, and your future is not going to be very bright. And it was Ronald Reagan who came along and said, no, we don't accept that. America's not going to decline. You don't have to inherit something that is lesser than it used to be. And I think that was the message that resonated more than anything else with young people.
Yeah, absolutely, John. Is that the Democratic Party had been the party of the future since 1932 when FDR ran. Happy days are here again, and then it was continued with John Kennedy when he used to tell crowds, let's get this country moving again. Until 1980, when Jimmy Carter, overtaken by a lot of leftists, preaches a future of scarcity and sacrifice, and that by the late 70s, for the first time in polling history, is that parents don't believe their children's lives would be better than it had been for themselves. And Reagan sees this and basically says, well, if Carter's going to give up being the party of the future, then I'll make the Republican Party the party of the future, which, by the way, it hadn't been for several generations. And so he starts talking about the future, and he starts talking about opportunity. He starts talking about all the things that young Americans want to hear, which has been endemic to this country for 200 years, which is that the future will be better than it has been for our children. There will be a hope and opportunity and expanded freedoms and all the things that make, or part of the things that make living in America worthwhile.
And now, of course, long after the fact, he's being subjected to this just ridiculous attack by Hollywood that he was suffering from dementia throughout his second term and being guided by an intern who convinced him that he was an actor playing the part of the president. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Well, as you recall, about 10 years ago, CBS tried to air a movie that depicted Reagan and Mrs. Reagan very, very badly. And there was a tremendous pushback from grassroots against this. And they used no knowledgeable Reagan historian as a consultant. Nobody ever worked for him. They just created this false storyline. And the CBS ended up canceling it and airing it on some tiny, flimsy little cable system, which nobody watched. But so I'm hoping is that there will be pushback against this movie as well, to either use economic means to stop it from being produced, or if it's produced, to make sure that it's a failure.
Well, I hope so too. Craig Shirley, thank you so much for being with us on the Laura Ingraham Show.
You bet, John. And Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas to you.